The unknown says our confidence is naive. Compromise. Stick to the tried and tested. Your passion is aggressive, knowing that we are coming for everything, marching forwards in numbers, in ones and zeros. The past has no leverage on us. The present expected us to stand still, but time ticked our presence, with the future inscribing us into history's foundation, calling us by our names, including the clicks in our names and clicking of our fingers. Once not born with silver spoons in their mouths, are now makers of the spoon and benders thereof, came to this earth with answers clenched in fist, unclenching fist to be the answer. Ours is not a race to come first or be first, but to influence and impact us, energy injectors, conductors of creativity, dancers with the rain, proverbs for our posterity, signaling the speed of ideas, implanting innovation, setting standards a tradition. We are outliers, the avant-garde, belonging to secrets whispered in spaces unseen for fear of our splendor. We are resolutely spewing out stagnation, a slow poison for the norm, perplexing conformity. We're not taking up space only to be muted at the table, not just conduits between what should be and is, not just bodies treading into uncharted public realms, but we are tomorrow's tools, the manifestation of ideals unscripted, leaning on the reassurance of the rising of the sun the next day. Let he without foresight cast the first doubt, whilst we visionaries converge at Urban Festival 2020. Welcome.
Meet the Mazibugos, a family living in the township of Soweto in the city of Johannesburg. Grandma Sophie, daughter Nkintani, and son Sipho live with mom and dad. Nkintani and Sipho are both university students. Grandma, Gogo Sophie, is retired, while Mr. and Mrs. Mazibugo work in Sandton. At dinner time, the conversation centers on the fact that Gogo Sophie had a very long and tiring day. She had to go to the post office on the other side of town to collect her pension. Because she missed the 6 a.m. bus, Gogo had to wait a whole 2 hours for the next one in the cold. Gogo Sophie prefers the bus to the minibus taxi because it drops her close to the post office and because it's more affordable. Her grandson doesn't understand the reason for this long delay and suggests Gogo try a new way of using public transport. Sipho tells her that she could have taken the Bus Rapid Transit System, or BRT, a new transport system designed to ensure that all who live in the cities and townships can have easy access to the services they need. The BRT is affordable and is made for everyone, young, old, and disabled. This new public transport system is an important part of the national urban policy called the Integrated Urban Development Framework, or the IUDF. Adopted by the South African government in 2016, the IUDF provides a new approach to urban investment, which in turn guides the private sector and households. Its vision is livable, safe, resource-efficient cities and towns that are socially integrated, economically inclusive, and globally competitive, where residents actively participate in urban life. Mr. Mazibugo adds that the IUDF aims to guide the development of cities to be well connected, in which everyone can live and move with ease, while addressing the unique conditions and challenges facing South Africa's cities and towns. Transport systems like the BRT are actually part of rectifying the old geographical patterns created under apartheid, which forced poor, mostly black people to live in areas far from the cities and far from work and recreation opportunities. For example, many people live in Soweto but work in Sandton. This means they have to use a large part of their income and spend hours every day just on transport to work. but a reliable public transport system like the BRT shows that city governments are trying to improve their lives. Nkensani agrees that this is an important policy, but she has a different set of goals. Her main concern is whether she will get a job after university graduation. Unemployment among young people is really high. Her second concern is security. As a young woman, safety is a big issue. Her mother explains that the IUDF recognizes that cities and towns are at the center of driving sustainable urban development, creating an environment which is conducive to live, work and play. There are many programs that each municipality is running to ensure that communities are safe, especially for women and children, like the creation of parks. These parks are not only meant to make cities beautiful, which is important, but also to allow safe spaces for people to play and relax in. Mr. Mazibogo mentions that it is also important for citizens to engage with cities, to learn about their programs and to attend public participation meetings in order to hold cities accountable on their promises. Certain programs, like those focused on equipping and empowering youth to contribute to the city's economy and overall future of our country, run all year round. Some programs are aimed at integrating transport and mobility for people like Gogo, while others serve to create safe recreation areas or to build office and residential infrastructure. The IUDF vision for South Africa's urban areas recognizes that the country has different types of cities and towns, which have different roles and requirements. As such, the vision has to be interpreted and pursued in differentiated and locally relevant ways. Gogo, who has been listening all this time, laughs and says, "Okay, all of you with all these big words, my head is hurting. Make me some tea now. And Sipho, please get me a BRT ticket. I'm not waiting this long again next month."
So good afternoon to everybody, and welcome to everybody. If you're in South Africa, it's afternoon, and we are so happy to have you joining us on this platform. I am Stephanie Chetty, Director for Urban Policy Development and Management from the National Department of Cooperative Governance, responsible for the Integrated Urban Development Framework. As you've just seen now, this beautiful video that we had screened here with you guys on the IUDF. And this afternoon session, we are going to take you through what IUDF means and how it relates to the Urban Fest and what we are doing to empower the civic as the theme for setting in the Urban Fest. We are joined with us by two of our colleagues from the UN Habitat and from the Technical Advisor on Global Network on Safer Cities. So we have with us Juma Asiago and Frans van Sieren, who will later give you a presentation on showcasing what the United Nations have done in terms of their contributions and innovation towards safer cities. But for now, I'm going to just take you through what the IUDF is and what have we been doing in South Africa together collectively to support the initiatives of implementing the IUDF along with the safer cities. Can I have the holding screen? Okay, so whilst we're waiting for the holding screen, we are gathered here once again to showcase our contributions towards the Urban Festival 2020 around the theme Empowering the Civic. And we are going to be talking a little bit on how the UN has showcased their innovations towards safer cities in the last 25 years. Before I hand over to Juma Asiago, we are going to then just show you a little bit on what and how it connects to what we are doing here in South Africa. The IUDF is South Africa's first urban policy to address spatial transformation and urbanization. It is linked with a vision to create livable, safe, resource-efficient cities and towns that are socially integrated, economically inclusive, and globally competitive, where residents actively participate in urban life. As you've seen in the video earlier, it showcased 4 strategic goals: inclusive access, inclusion and access, inclusive growth, effective governance, and spatial integration. The policy has 9 levers, and one of them being empowered active communities, where it focuses around urban safety. And we have linked with that the cross-cutting priorities, which is urban resilience, urban safety, and rural-urban linkages. So we are discussing the issue around showcasing the innovations of the UN Habitat Safer Cities in the last 25 years. And we would like to say that South Africa has played a role in championing the UN system-wide Safer City Human Settlement Guidelines. And we have showcased this in our example in South Africa, in the province called KwaZulu-Natal, in a metro called eThekwini municipality, where they have been implementing the system-wide Safer City strategy within their metro. And we have started a global conversation on the various types of support towards the UN Habitat system-wide Safer City guidelines. And today we are proud to share with you and showcase the 25 years of what the UN Habitat has done in terms of innovating safer cities. The event for this afternoon will present 25 years of the UN Habitat's work around safer cities. It will be building on the prevention of crime and violence in cities and towns, and how they've managed to showcase some of their initiatives and the support and the programs and projects under that. And in particular, it will focus on promoting how we continue as a community and social capital through the systemic and integrated urban planning to ensure better management and governance of these various safer city approaches at the local government level. So I'm going to hand you over now to Juma. Juma Asiago is the Safer Cities Program Coordinator at the UN Habitat, and he is happy to be joining the Urban Festival this afternoon and will take you through his presentation. Thanks, Juma. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and a good afternoon to all of you. This 9th day of October. As you all are aware, we're in the middle of the Urban October month, which is indeed a global festival, just like adapted into the context of South Africa, where countries around the world are celebrating the innovations that they have been able to accomplish over the past year, and of course over the past 5 years since the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was put in place by governments. This Urban October also coincides with what we are defining as the 40 days of innovation for safer cities, the 40 Days Safer Cities Challenge. And this is driven by the need to link what was otherwise understood to be a security agenda to a developmental agenda. The International Day of Peace that was celebrated on the 21st of September brought together largely actors within the security sector around SDG 16 that looked at ways in which institutions around the world, both national and local institutions, could contribute to reducing all forms of crime and violence in countries. So by linking the International Day of Peace and SDG 16 to the Urban October and running right to World Cities Day on the 31st of October, was essentially a way of making more explicit that the SDG Goal 11 that seeks to make cities and human settlements safer, inclusive, more resilient, and sustainable with a set number of targets and indicators will only be achieved if it is connected to the other SDG SDG targets and indicators. Indeed, what we see and are saying today is that there will not be any form of sustainable development without safety, and likewise, there will be no safety without sustainable development. So that drives us then to the next question, which is, what has the UN contributed this far to change the narrative and to bring us to a perspective where we see safety being about making cities more livable places to be? And as Stephanie did really mention, our takeoff point is really in the prevention science, the prevention of crime and violence, which in the context of South Africa is also very, very, very much alive. We are aware that 20 years ago, 25 years ago, the Habitat Agenda was put to place in Istanbul. This agenda in 1996 heralded a shift in the way we looked at cities, away from just being a brick and mortar environment to one that really embraced the living environment in human settlements. At that point of time, governments recognized that to achieve sustainable human settlements, the social and economic aspects of cities required to become a key focus in the way they delivered development beyond just the housing and built environment agenda. It was then that safety and security began to resonate with what was an urban agenda. It was at that point of time that we all recognized that the police and the criminal justice system alone were not able to cope with the levels of crime and violence. The repressive measures that governments applied in that particular time were not really yielding the meaningful results in terms of the reduction of crime and violence that were envisaged. In the case of South Africa, just to put our context together, in that particular time when the UN came up with this global plan of action, there was an ongoing conversation about shifting the safety agenda with the first policy document on the white paper for safety and security in 1998 that really brought to bear the city level crime prevention approaches. But as we know, we already at the UN already had started engaging South Africa in technical cooperation measures to see to it that new forms of approaches could actually be applied to the context of the rising crime and violence. And so with the coming of the white paper on safety and security, the United Nations then introduced technical projects in Durban and in Johannesburg, which were then referred within the pool of safer cities, an approach which was largely about trying to get crime and violence as issues of better urban management, better urban governance. As this session seeks to address the 25 years of what we have done, we are largely speaking to systemic changes that have happened. The move from just talking about the what to also the how. We now have as a global community, amassed plenty of evidence of what has worked and what does not work at the municipal level, at the criminal justice system level. And all this to say has led us to the realization that crime and violence are now a common responsibility of all levels of government in collaboration with other non-state actors. The big achievement today in our narrative of safety and security, acknowledged worldwide, is that we need to look at safety from a perspective of how all actors can actually engage in the co-production of safety and security for all. This implies a local governance framework or a local governance conception as opposed to just a local government perspective. We have now shifted our outlook from the traditional responses that focus just on the criminal justice system to one that really speaks to every individual citizen playing a role in building safety at the neighborhood level, at the community level, looking at the causes rather than the symptoms of what crime and violence plays to. And it is here that prevention is indeed the emphasis of our activities today, and one that enables us to see the perspective of safety from now a more livable environment, as opposed to investing in safety in ways that increase the number of policemen on the streets per population ratio, or likewise in ways that look at how to approach crime and violence as a disease, which has also been in the infancy of the prevention approaches around the world. We now are awakened to a reality of looking at safety and security from how people perceive their place and space in cities and towns, how the different levels of development interventions that are taking place within a city contribute to the delivery of safety and to the way that safety can more effectively be applied across gender, across age, and across the differentiation of culture and everything that cities bring to the fore. It also comes with a perspective based on the numerous piloting of interventions that the UN has engaged globally, of the fact that today we do not approach safety with a perspective of urbanization as a bad outcome of development. Rather, we are approaching safety with a lens that while it is an occurrence that takes place within the rapid urbanization parameters that play out in cities and human settlements, it is in contexts where poorly planned urbanization has led to distorted configurations of cities, such as the architectures of fear around gated neighborhoods or socially segregated neighborhoods that have actually allowed insecurity to build within cities. We now would love to see, and we have come to that realization with the new urban agenda that was adopted in 2016 in Quito, that there are positive attributes that we can see, including in high crime and violence neighborhoods, where communities have been able to cope and adapt, and through it innovate various measures to enhance the safety of those neighborhoods. We are now building on urbanization as a source of development and looking more inward into the social capital that we find in communities. The prevention approach, which came with the UN guidelines in 1995, brought to bear a multi-pronged approach, one that looked at prevention from a social lens, that built into the way we see our education systems, our health systems, our sports and culture systems, to one that really took law enforcement and effective law enforcement, effective and professional law enforcement as a key attribute to the way safety was delivered. And in addition, integrated planning and design measures around cities, all together working to produce the safety solution. Again, the way safety is processed was a key dimension to the way the delivery of safety has been achieved, where it has worked in cities around the world. Evidence became a key driver, appreciating that there is no one-size-fits-all solutions. And it is clear from the way crime and violence has played out across the world that it varies according to the different realities that cities are in, and not just at the level of the city, but also it varies within a city across different neighborhoods. And therefore, a security diagnosis or a safety diagnosis is able to help us come up with a better understanding about what types of crime and violence take place within a particular neighborhood, and also look at the other social debts or the social inequalities that exist within those particular neighborhoods that require to be addressed in order to build a collective strategy that all citizens can participate with government to deliver safety and security. Again, it was also a question of the diagnosis providing a clear picture, a common vision around which citizens could then leverage their different assets and resources to bring to bear on the implementation of the city's safety strategy. So in effect, safety becomes a platform around which cities are able to look at the governance of their cities and be able to improve the effectiveness of the governance of the cities by really building on the evidence of what speaks to all citizens around safety and security. And as I speak, I'm trying to lay in a much more plain language version the way we conceive and speak to the prevention of crime and violence. The continuous periodic review of safety and security also has played to be one of the key innovations around which cities that have considered themselves as successful in implementing a co-production approach have attributed their success to. Systemically, it means we need not only just come up with an action plan on a one-time basis, but regularly review this action plan by a continuous and systematic way of gathering the evidence to then inform the different strategies that municipalities particularly can apply across their various departments. Again, in this process, the building of the coalition of actors around the local governance of safety framework is also key. And it begins with the municipality itself being able to establish a local coordinating unit that is specialized and that can assist the leadership and management to then be able to distill what this diagnosis is saying and take it to the level of action with the different departmental managers understanding what their mandates can actually do to change the situation of crime and violence in particular neighborhoods. The institutionalization of the safety process is indeed one hallmark that local governments can actually bring to the table that is a value add and a differentiated reality, as opposed to how national governments through their policing frameworks are able to implement prevention strategies at the local level. In the sense that the institutionalization of these safety processes have not just taken a single sectorial approach, but have really embraced a multi-sectorial approach, which is indeed key to really tackling the multi-causal realities of crime and violence. The key theory that has emerged as a result of this embracement of safety within an urban framework is that if a process of equipping municipalities with tools to create municipal-wide safety programs is developed and implemented in partnership with civil society and citizens, then citizens participate in the co-production of safety and security for all. Prevention of violence and unrest is also addressed proactively, and safety perceptions are also improved, expanding as well the citizens' exercise of their right to the city and enjoyment of the benefits of urban life. In this point, I think I would like to maybe, in the absence of Franz at the moment, try to really narrow down on also how the South Africa story has evolved. We know that the institutionalization of safety in 1998 came in with numerous hurdles due to the historical background that South Africa was coming through in the transition to democracy. It also came up against a background of the history of militarized law enforcement and a history of harsh and punitive measures in the face of crime and violence. We also entered the context of South Africa on the basis on a reality of the lack of expertise on prevention science. And there was also at that particular time a large public distrust in the criminal justice system. But while all this also prevailed, there was still in many quarters of the public realm, the public pressure to implement more punitive actions using increased police presence across neighborhoods. And so to be able to instill prevention was therefore understood to be at a city level, was therefore not an easy buy-in from the authorities at that particular time, but as well from the way citizens looked at local government. But in spite of these challenges, one thing that really helped bring safety and security to the fore at that time was the fact that we looked at crime varying across the geographic locations of cities. And this required different interventions at different times in different places. And local government was seen to be the most important level of government that would be able to address this particular dimension of the variance of crime across geographic location. This also came with a strength that there was at that time large-scale failure on the part of national government to successfully prevent crime, primarily due to the lack of understanding of the nature and variation of crime from locality to locality. And also there was the then move at the international level to more situational crime prevention measures that alerted government officials to the importance of understanding the dynamics of geographic location. There was also at that time an increasing appreciation of the need of multidisciplinary approaches to crime prevention, which required the cooperation of service providers. And local government, again, was the level of government that had the necessary parameters to bring the different sectors together. As a starting point to that city level prevention in South Africa, the UN Habitat Safer Cities approach conceived itself around a problem-solving approach, where community involvement was an essential aspect of the way the projects in Durban and Joburg were conceived. It required community-based partners to have the necessary capacities. So beyond just local government, there was a shift in focus to see to it that civil society organizations equally had investment towards building their capacity on prevention. There was also a real focus on the systematic and thorough research required. And we had institutions like the Institute of Security Studies embarking on large-scale victimization surveys across the metros of South Africa, which brought, in fact, new perceptions and new realities about how crime was understood, largely a reality that crime was actually impacting most on the urban poor, as opposed to the more wealthy sections of the society. Again, crime prevention initiatives that were already being implemented under the white paper directly from the policing dimension were short-term in their reality. And they came to an appreciation that crime prevention was much more a long-term investment that was required to offset the continuous short-term expenditures on crime control and enforcement approaches. But this also then required us to look at professional and efficient law enforcement. There was indeed the need for us to see prevention as a complementary approach to the repressive measures that the police authorities had to professionally and efficiently execute. So a multifaceted plan was one that was in the best interest of the co-production approach, where citizens were seen to be the key actors with a multi-level governance of safety approach involving not just local government, but the police and the criminal justice system in the delivery of safety and security. It then brought us to a realization that we needed tools to show how to organize prevention in cities. And the experiences of Durban and Joburg are differentiated in that reality. While in Durban, an area-based management approach was the basis upon which prevention was integrated into the city fabric. At the onset in Joburg, the prevention approach did not really work. And this was largely because there was a lack of ownership by the line management of government in the city. It was only until the Joburg 2020 vision was brought to bear, with safety as one of its pillars, that the Safer Cities approach then reinvented itself to what it is today. So key to this particular way of outlook of safer cities is the leadership and management of local governments. And coordination aspects of this approach have been influenced largely in their differentiated outcomes in cities across South Africa by the leadership, by the financing models, and by the staffing skill sets of the units that have been established on safer cities in the country. The integration of prevention at the local government level has also further evolved in its reality to embrace safety linkages to tenure security and to natural and man-made disasters. And location has been a key driver to this multidimensional outlook of safety and security in cities today that influences the way we look, the way we appreciate safety today, to such an extent that building safety through slum upgrading has become one of the key dimensions, particularly in Latin America, in cities like Medellin, in cities like Rio de Janeiro, where we had the police pacification projects in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. Safety and security in this perspective were combined with interventions around planning for social integration, where citizens built pride in place in their public spaces through large-scale infrastructure interventions. And this largely speaks to how we also then draw on the social capital of communities as a key attribute to transform the challenge of safety into opportunities for cities to become better connected, more livable, and more compact. Today, safety is driving the narrative around cities for people rather than people for cities. It is helping governments in their planning and design function understand that the architecture of fear is actually not a panacea for safety solutions. Rather, it is an escape from the reality that safety as a public good has not been effectively addressed in its social spectrum by simply building cities with the architecture of gated neighborhoods, and on the other hand, leaving the urban poor to struggle with vigilantism. So in a sense, safety today is in fact a more systemic issue that requires the social aspects of understanding the lifestyles, the circumstances, and the behaviors of citizens in their realities, in their specific neighborhoods, as a key driver to the way we plan, manage, and govern our cities. In this convening capacity that the United Nations has brought to bear, we have several institutions around the world in the global network on safer cities that have innovated tools not just socially, but also technologically. We have actors like SafetyPin in India that have been able to take the safety audit tools to now the use of mobile technology that allows citizens in their comfort zones to be able to map their own safety and security realities. The global partnership that the UN brings to the table is also manifest in the way learning is today taking root between cities. A clear example in South Africa is a convening of the Urban Safety Reference Group that brings metro cities together and that can herald today innovations such as the State of Safety in Cities report that allows us to contextualize safety in more meaningful ways about how to improve the livability of our cities. As well, on a regional scale, we have cities in Africa coming together around the African Forum for Urban Safety, taking safety as a key driver to the way they improve their public spaces in terms of their access, their use, and as well the availability of public spaces. Safety has become the laboratory around which cities are reinventing ways of looking at the city as an element of social integration. And it's where we can actually see children, youth, women, and men as key concerns around our urban development reality. Laboratories, as cities may be understood today with the innovations of safety, suggest that we can pull together the fragmented knowledge that exists within our cities to facilitate learning, to draw the innovations that the cities already have, and facilitate the integrated solutions that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has put in place. The UN today is working largely on measurement and monitoring to build the capacities of cities around measurement and monitoring using the UN system-wide guidelines on safer cities and human settlements. In this sense, we believe that with the Urban Festival and with the annual reflections that we have, we will be able to, within the next 2-3 years, help cities, including those in South Africa, draw from the strengths that they have already built towards facilitating those integrated solutions and towards enabling us measure and understand how safety is being improved in the city. To clarify, safety is now not just a policing concept, but it's about managing the inadequacies presented in the environment, due not only to the incapacitation of the criminal justice system, but also the poor planning of the urbanization process. It is also a multi-level governance of safety concept that clarifies the role of local government through a municipal plan for safety. The current situation we have in South Africa today puts South Africa as a champion country that could actually facilitate the new narrative of safety to the rest of the world. And we see this in the new framing that the South African Police Service has reached out to 10 municipalities to build on these gains around the policy of safer cities to make them more effective, to improve the quality and consistency of policy and programming. In this sense, the UN system-wide guidelines is for us a key benchmark that brings the standards and norms that we need today to promote participatory and inclusive safety, tending towards social cohesion and a better quality of life in which all inhabitants can feel identified with. It is really the space of innovation that we can pull together safety and security tools across the world, both developed and in developing countries, to bear on the situations of our specific countries. With that, I think I would then, without further ado, open the floor to questions, if at all, or clarifications that can enable us to then take this in the form of an interactive dialogue.
Thank you, Juma. I think that was very informative and very insightful, and a lot has been said on the work that the UN Habitat is doing and contributing to. And we just want to thank the UN Habitat for those initiatives, because clearly South Africa is learning from them and has adopted many of the processes like you have alluded to. We have some very interesting questions and comments that's coming out in the chat. There's one in particular from Barbara Holtzman. She speaks about transversal, she says, you speak about transversal responses and systemic safety, but does local government have a transversal capacity to make the relevant practical? And then she goes on to say, how do we build those capacities of cities to understand the intersection between, and for instance, for safety on children, and what does that mandate for a city? Now, Juma, I know you've also been talking a lot about the examples, and I know recently we've been working quite closely as well with Mexico, the city of Guadalajara, and our sister country, Canada, as well. So perhaps you can share light on what some of the points that Barbara is raising, and then also introduce the element around public safety, for instance, for children, and the value of participatory arts that urban safety brings about in your discussion.
Okay, so the transversal reality of safety today, the question is, how are we able to achieve this? Is that what I understood to be the question?
So the question is around, how do we respond to the transversal reality to ensure systemic safety? at a local government level. And what Barbara is asking is, do we have the right capacity? Does local government have the capacity to implement safety strategies throughout its existing policy, its mechanisms? And in doing so, how do we ensure that those policies address the issues around children and safety and include the performing arts to contribute and raise awareness towards urban safety?
So I think the key aspect in this is more the approach to integral management of cities. And as we speak today, the example of the interventions taking place in Durban today come to bear, where safety has for a long time been capacitated as a unit within the safety and security ambit of the municipality. But over the past 1.5 years, there has been an increasing effort to try to make safety become a common indicator across the municipal departments beyond just the safety and security cluster. Now, the question is, in this lateral move of integrating safety across a municipal transversal framework, do we have the capacity of the various departments to be able to take this forward? I think the answer is no. How do we then build that capacity of cities to understand the intersection between, for example, the safety of children and the city mandate? It's to be able to bring these non-traditional actors to the table with the way they perceive the way they understand. If safety was to be fixed today in a neighborhood, what would it really look like? And I think Barbara Holtman has been one of those experts globally recognized for coming up with a tool that addresses the cycle of crime and violence in ways in which we are able to pick this systemic outlook and begin to push communities forward towards looking at the reality of how does safety look like when it is fixed. As I say, we already have the evidence. We now can put future scenario realities around our cities and towns across the various services that municipal departments do provide. We need to be able to build the capacity of these municipalities, for municipal departments, for them to see clearly their role in safety and security by accompanying them through that process of future scenario building. I think this is going to be a very interesting exercise in the next 1 year in South Africa, particularly when we start looking at the indicators that would accompany, for example, the way we understand safety of children in schools. For too long, in the face of insecurity of children in schools, we have been building schools as fortresses of fear, as opposed to building them as cathedrals of learning, because learning essentially is one that requires an environment that is not about hard targeting or about raising fear, but one that should happen in a climate of love and care. And so we are going to be able to see that the type of indicators that begin to come to the table are those that will enhance the livability of cities in ways that the new urban agenda has laid out. I think this could be one of the answers that I could give. But to now link to the Mexico context, I would now like to introduce Franz van der Schuren, Stephanie, and perhaps for Franz to come in with now the perspective of how safety can be understood in its transversality, looking at the Latin American experiences. How has that manifested? And I'm sure he will be able to capture this within the human security framing that is also another dimension in which that transversality is now taking root. Franz?
Yes, good afternoon, Juma and all friends from South Africa. I'm sorry I was not able to accompany you before at a meeting with the presidency of Chile this morning. My camera is not working. It seems I don't know why, but I think with the microphone, I think it's enough. I'm sorry not to be able to show you the camera. You asked me about what happened in Latin America at the moment with the experience of the last 20 years when we were working on citizen security. It means that the focus we have there to face the problem of safety and security at municipal level, which is a very slow process in the sense that it costs a lot to convince mayors and to convince the government, the central government mainly, to accept the fact that the municipality has a role to play in prevention, particularly. Some of the cities have been even brilliant in that, like Medellin, Bogota particularly, but also Diadema in Brazil, Peñalolén in Chile, some city in Mexico and so on. So we have now a set of cities who have been advancing in that area of assuming the responsibility to deal with prevention at a different level, prevention focusing on youth at risk, focusing on neighborhoods particularly, and also on gender issue or different other issues which concern prevention. It has been a difficult process and a process which has had its own evolution in the sense that progressively the municipality were entering in this function of prevention discovered that the focusing on citizen security was not enough. So we had discovered that, and particularly the situation of the coronavirus obliged them to expand their approach and to work in human security. It means putting the emphasis on all the vulnerabilities we have in Latin America in our cities. And we adopt progressively a sort of approach which concern the different territories, the different level of insecurity in a broad sense and vulnerability in a different neighborhood. We have, for example, a category which includes I would say, without considering the rich neighborhood, the neighborhood, would say traditional, normal neighborhoods where we can improve the situation through some very focused intervention on youth at risk, for example, on issue of gender or in improvement of the neighborhoods itself. But you have then two other category of neighborhoods which are quite important. There's not a few of them, there's a lot of them, which are what we call vulnerable neighborhoods, where you have a lot of difficulty due to poverty, chronic poverty, bad design, urban design, a lot of problem of access to service, urban service, social service, and so on. In this neighborhood, it's quite difficult to work because a lot of vulnerability are impeding to advance, and the social cohesion often is not that big. But we can, we are doing the advanced municipality in that sense are doing a good job with for example, with gangs, youth gangs, with the different level of deterioration of neighborhood and so on. And we have quite a good experience in that field. But we have a third category of neighborhood where what we call what Jenny Pierce and other authors call the neighborhood of chronic violence, where not only people are poor, but where the violence, the structural violence and the internal violence and violence in all the aspects in the family, at school, in the neighborhood itself, where the gender violence exists, school violence exists, criminal violence exists. That creates a kind of field where organized crime take the lead in this in this neighborhood. But basically, they are, let's say, the boss in the neighborhood themselves. It makes it impossible for them to get by their own force to get out of their systemic situation of violence and vulnerability. In that case, they have a good study on that in Mexico and Colombia. It's very hard to work, and we thought an intervention by the state and the municipality and an intervention on the long term, which recreate progressively a kind of confidence in this neighborhood with the inhabitants, with the best local leader. Taking into account this a long-term intervention, it's impossible to change the situation. The problem is that today in a country like Mexico, for example, the situation is not a very small minority. We had, for example, in Guadalajara recently, a diagnosis, and about this kind of neighborhoods represent at least in a city of a little bit more than 1 million inhabitants, practically at least 20 neighborhoods, which is quite important, and that paralyzes practically the social cohesion. Makes create a situation where we have practically civil war in certain neighborhoods, and you have an important hegemony of the organized crime in that situation. So this is we are forced due to this situation to have an approach which is diversified, taking into account the different kind of neighborhoods. We have also to take into account, for example, which is very frequent in Latin America, the historical centers. It means the neighborhoods which represent something of the identity of the neighborhood. I would say, for example, to take an analogy, the historical center of Jobourg, for example. But we have a lot of this kind of classical neighborhood, which are beautiful monuments sometimes, but there are sometimes neighborhoods which have been destroyed for lack of attention by the government. It is quite important because sometimes these neighborhoods become occupied by also organized crime or kind of delinquent, and it deteriorates completely the image of the city and destroy the identity of the city. So today, for the municipality are working on prevention. It's very hard to work, and it's very hard due to this the diversification of situation in the neighborhoods, to the obligation to approach them through a human security approach, which include all vulnerability, addressing all the vulnerability in terms of urbanism, in terms of housing, in terms of transport, in terms of access to water, access to different services such as education or health, at the same time as criminality. If you work only on criminality, you will lose your time, because if there is no progress in the quality of life of the people in that kind of neighborhood, people will not follow you. They would prefer to continue to work as let's say accomplices of organized crime than to work with the government. So one of our difficulty is that. The second difficulty, if you allow me, Juma, is also the situation of the police. We have a very important crisis. I just came out from a commission of reform of police in Chile, with the presidency of the Republic. This is a very important issue in all Latin America. Today we have a serious crisis of the all police in all South America. There is no exception. A little bit more in some countries, a little bit less in others, but basically the reform of police is an urgent problem, and very few governments are addressing it. And when they address it, it's because you had some scandal, accident, or like yesterday or 2 days ago, we have in Chile, practically brutality of the police was so evident that the government could not avoid to modify its position. It was, for example, the meeting today was expressing that also. So it is an urgent issue, because if you don't if you don't address this problem, you will have a lot of difficulty to implement prevention policy, because police in many cases is corrupt as because they work with the organized crime. Sometimes is corrupt also because they don't go to certain neighborhoods. They prefer to avoid that, or they work with the small or big delinquent you have in that neighborhood. So it's very important today for us. It's an urgency to face the issue of police as well as prevention, approaching them in a different way according to the level of vulnerability in each neighborhood. So prevention means for us to work at neighborhood level, means to work on a perspective of human security, and to work in partnership with different actors, but particularly with the police. That is the situation we see today in a very short words that we face in Latin America, where the organized crime become more and more powerful in many countries. Even the countries who were considered as free of organized crime, like Chile, like Argentina, like Uruguay, they start to have a very strong presence there. It's a very serious issue for us.
Yes.
Thank you very much for them.
Yeah, I think, Franz, by you speaking to this, in part you have answered Anne Tabadgiritz. I think that's the name, Tabadgiritz, who in the chat is asking about specific actions that have been done to mitigate crime cases. And I think you have brought to bear what the Safer Cities approach has brought into the perspective of neighborhood classification according to the levels of crime, and shown how critical neighborhoods vary from the normal neighborhoods, and what specific type of interventions one can actually take to it. And I think in South Africa, you have the case of the violence prevention through urban upgrading initiative in Khayelitsha, which I think, to respond to Anne, is one such intervention that you could see, or maybe a really brilliant example that shows an integral approach in which the issue of security is a key one for community empowerment and for a sustainable, peaceful climate within the township. The VPU initiative has developed a set of indicators of safety which concern mainly the urban aspect of crime prevention, and has created various initiatives such as community courts, mediators trained for specific interventions, also peace committees and street law clinics, including also libraries. I think this is an excellent way in which you could see innovation of safety through a slum upgrading approach. You also see similar type of interventions in transport, like as I mentioned to you in Medellin, the metro cables being implemented in the Comuna Stress, which is one of the barrios in that particular area. Or we also see the way Bogota has dealt with the aspect of the modalities of transport and security within the local critical neighborhoods. I think these are some of the very specific urban interventions that you could speak to today. Stephanie?
Thanks, Juma. Thanks, Franz, for those great inputs and contributions. We have with us two questions on the Q&A, and we also have a question by Andiswa Spellman, which we're going to allow her to come in live. So, Sean, can you give Andiswa access to the platform? And once thereafter, we'll take in the two questions on the chat. It's from Thomas Hellman, and one is directed to Juma, and the other one is to Franz. Andiswa, are you with us? Can you hear us? Can you unmute?
Yes, I can hear you, Steph. Thanks.
Over to you, Andiswa. Please direct your question to the panelists.
Maybe it has been addressed. I came in a bit later. I just had the topic about safety and security, and I'm looking. I actually posed a question when they were talking about the townships economy and taxi rank, and I wondered how are they going to address the issue of illegal substances that are going around the communities, and also, yeah, the gender-based violence that is going on. If they can maybe try and address that for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Andiswa. So Juma, would you like to take on that question? Because I know that in South Africa at the moment, gender-based violence has been a huge concern leading up to the pandemic of COVID-19. And we as government, we've tried to now implement gender-based budgeting and gender-based reporting within our existing plans to ensure that we cater for women and youth in particular and the disadvantaged. Perhaps you want to just share some light on some of the experiences on how one can go ahead and prevent some of those measures in the way they look at urban safety.
Yes, and I guess we can answer this both ways, both myself and Franz. I think the big question here is how does a local government intervene on gender-based violence issues, but as well connected to alcohol and substance abuse within neighborhoods. I think the framing of this was clear, and I tried to emphasize this in my conversation just a few minutes ago. First, it depends on our level of understanding of the profiles of crime and violence in specific neighborhoods. That's number one. Number two, we need to approach this with a multi-sectorial approach. It means gender-based violence does not concern just one particular department. It's not just a social welfare issue. It also has got to do with the spatial planning of the city. It as much has got to do with the education dimensions of what the city is also taking to, and therefore that goes to say that an interdepartmental approach of the local government is key in its delivery of safety at a specific neighborhood level. Gone are the days when we thought that sectorial interventions, just by taking a public health approach to substance abuse, would be the cure to the problems of drugs in a particular township. What we evidently need is a change of tact to one that really sees the multi-sectorial intervention being applied based on the evidence that is deduced. And again, this keeps changing. And so to the extent that we can, in a more systemic way, be engaging with communities to monitor and to be able then to provide the tailored interventions in those particular neighborhoods will be to the extent that we can be successful. Franz, can you maybe speak to it with a more community mediation lens?
I'm not sure I can add too much on that. I would say concerning the, I think there's two different issues, gender violence and the drug abuse or drug traffic. We face a serious drug traffic problem in all Latin America. And I would say the policy which have been developed since the year 1970 after the Nixon proposal is a complete failure. They say organized crime is every day stronger and stronger, and nothing has been has impeded an increase in consumption of drug. And it becomes more and more important if you take into account the fact that from the, I would say, market point of view, the classical market of drug in United States, which was the classical market for the Latin American cocaine producer, has been decreased by 40%, which means that and the production of cocaine increased even to this year. For example, according to UNODC report, the production in Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, which is the three countries which has a monopoly of cocaine, are increasing their production, and the market in the United States was decreasing since the year 2005 to year 2011, more or less. So it means that the substance are sold now in Europe, but also through the different country which has transit country like Chile, like Argentina, like Uruguay, and so on. And in this country of transit country, they become progressively a market for the drug. So before we were only countries where there was a transit of drug, like Mexico, like Colombia, and today we are also a country where people are consuming more and more this kind of drug when they pass through this transit country and going through Africa to Europe. So we have, let's say, a big market, drug producing in Colombia, passing through a transit country in Latin America, going to through Africa, and then to Europe, and in mixture in Africa of this transit of the drug with the issue of migrant. There's the same people who transport the drug to Europe from Africa transport at the same time migrant. It's a big, very big business, quite important. So what can the municipality do? Generally, the response is nothing, because it's an issue of the state, which is not. It's an issue of the state, but what the state have been doing now, it's a sort of war, like in a military war, like in Mexico, and it's a complete failure. It means that the organized crime didn't decrease its strength. And we had, for example, in Mexico, in 15 years, more than 70,000 dead, killed by organized crime or killed by the police or killed by anybody, but related to this drug traffic issue. We have similar number or proportion of death in Colombia. We don't have precise data, but it's more or less the same situation. So if the state limit itself to a war against the organized crime, it practically maybe has some success when they arrest some big leader, but immediately this institution, the cartel, becomes recreate with other leader, and drug trafficking doesn't diminish, and the drug consumption increase. So it's complete failure. For that reason, it's necessary to act at municipal level, at territorial level, at the neighborhood level with the community. It's the community. If you organize the community to in such a way that you create a sort of a collective efficiency, to speak in the language of Samson, which is the criminologist, to create this approach, you are able, if you work in partnership with the police, you are able to control the consumption of drug, the traffic of drug, and you clean the some neighborhoods. But at the same time, we have to realize that we have a sort of group of people who are out of the formal market of labor market, and what we call the ni in Latin America, which is not working, not studying. Let's say a number of that kind of people in Mexico today is 10 million people. 10 million people were not studying, young people, not working. So there's labor force available for organized crime. If you don't have an approach like the human security approach, where you provide them with labor, we provide them with access to the urban service, you provide them with quality of life, you will have these people available for organized crime. So the action of the municipality is to create this approach on human security. At the same time, an important aspect is to work with the police. In third aspect, to ensure that corruption is eradicated from the municipality. One of the big arguments, one big reason for which the organized crime enter in the different city and community is the corruption of the local authorities. And we have a lot of examples. In some place in Mexico, we have some mayor which have been appointed directly by organized crime. And they finance the campaign, the electoral campaign, and everything. So anti-corruption program is basic today at municipal level. At the same time, you have to approach them with community efficiency, and maybe mediation could be useful, but it's quite difficult to use mediation in this case. There are some very good examples in Brazil, in particular, in some neighborhoods which are favela, which are under control of organized crime. You have some spontaneous mediator, popular mediator, who are working, sorting out the different conflicts, which always are related to organized crime. In these neighborhoods who are of chronic violence, organized crime is everything. So if you have a small conflict among neighbors, it automatically relates to some problem related to organized crime. So we have some kind of experience, but it's difficult to implement that. It requires people well trained or having specific talent to do that. But I think the basic activity of the municipality is to organize the community in such a way that they create territory without drug with the community. They work with the police. They avoid. They have an approach, human security approach, and they avoid any kind of corruption. The main temptation for many mayors is to dialogue with organized crime, and that leads to a catastrophic situation. Because if you talk with one of the group, the second group, the enemy of the first cartel, will come and will start to blackmailing you. And that will be a catastrophic situation. So this is, I think, my view on Latin America. I don't know what we can do specifically in Africa, where the situation is probably a little bit different.
I think just to sum on that, I think what Franz also emphasizes here is also a dimension of looking at safety innovatively through social inclusion. And I think in many ways, as we begin to address what we call a systemic perspective as the hallmark of safer cities, we also then begin to understand that we will need to introduce better coping and adaptation tools, or a lens towards how to build on the social capital of communities to address some of these inherent challenges of safety and security at a neighborhood level. One thing that I think came in earlier that has not been emphasized a lot is arts and culture. And I think we are also beginning to interrogate the very successful practices largely in Latin America, but also in countries like South Africa. You have them there, where culture and arts has a place value for safety in the city, and where a lot of young people have been provided second chance opportunities through the use of arts and culture. We saw cases like in Rio de Janeiro, where arts and culture was used to change the relationship between the police and the young people in the favela, just by the police being trained to use arts and culture, to use hip hop and graffiti in public space, that changed the perception of the community that distrusted the police and made the community to understand the police as one of them. So instead of changing the young people in the face of drugs and gang violence, what changed was the relationship between the police and the young people. And that was the power of arts and culture. And so we can use such kind of social capital tools in our community as a powerful laboratory of social cohesion, and enable people to share meaningful emotional experiences in ways that allow them to overcome prejudices, stereotypes, and stigma. And that is a key attribute to safe cities.
Thanks, Juma, for that. I think that's very important to realize that communities and culture and arts plays a pivotal role in enabling safer cities in the way people respond to life, in the way they express, and also in the form of responding, instead of responding via violence and reacting, people respond through their arts and culture mechanisms. I'm now going to allow, there is a question on the chat from Muhammad, but I'm going to allow Thomas Hellman to come in. We've given him a panelist space right now. So Thomas, over to you. There's a question for Juma and more of a comment on the second one. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas. I'm working for the Inclusive Violence and Crime Prevention Program for GIZ here in South Africa. So Juma, you mentioned, and it's quite right, that there's quite a lot happening at the moment at the local level, which could lead to an improved understanding of safety at the local government level, specifically here in South Africa. Though I still think that there's a need for professionalization of safety practitioners that goes beyond policing, but really to integrate safety within municipal-wide planning. And I mean, I'm sure you're aware that in many municipalities, safety is still seen as something that the police should do, and often kind of like anchored at community services level. Often traffic officers are responsible for the issue of community safety. But really, I think it's important to look into more professionalization, to implement evidence-based plans, to run community safety audits, etc. And the question is, how do you, as UN Habitat, you see your role in kind of like supporting that further, that we advance in that, also looking into the various policies in South Africa. You mentioned the white paper, also towards the establishment of the National Center on Safety and Security. And then the second one, maybe that's also related to, in going to France, in talking about Guadalajara and Mexico. At the moment, the World Forum on Cities and Territories of Peace was launched beginning of this week. And it's going to be on until a face-to-face meeting that's planned for April, depending on how COVID-19 pandemic goes. But my question here and comment maybe is, it would be really lovely to see more cities and agencies from the African continent to also participate in that. And maybe, Franz, also, what's your role in kind of like supporting that, Ciudades de Paz? Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Juma and Franz.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Franz, would you like to respond? Juma as well. Thank you.
Let Juma respond, if you don't mind.
Yes, okay. I very much agree with Thomas, and that really speaks to the way we look at safety as a transversal issue. The point of entry is the policy frameworks that we want to integrate our safety narrative. And I think South Africa with the IUDF is the perfect entry point to begin to professionalize safety in sectors or in departments that otherwise did not understand safety as their core mandate. I think if we approached the systematization of experiences in cities around South Africa with this transversal outlook of safety across the development sectors that are in the urban spectrum, will enable us to change that narrative and allow new training opportunities through curriculum that we can develop based on the tools that we have. Already we are interested in doing that in Durban, and we want to look at training that goes beyond just the safety and security unit of the municipality to embrace those non-safety and security clusters of the municipality. And this will require continuous training, already building on initiatives like the Municipal Institute of Learning. I think that is a perfect starting point in which we can integrate safety curriculum that with a clear set of new indicators that also complement the traditional safety and security indicators. I think this is key. The safety monitor that we will put in place will be a key framework for cities to then adapt a transformative change in the way they tackle safety and in the way they professionalize safety within the non-traditional departments of the municipality. I think in terms of the World Forum for Territories and Peace in Mexico City, yes, indeed, it will integrate other regions, just as were the previous two in Madrid, in which we were a co-partner. We think South Africa will indeed be one of those countries that we identify to participate in that forum in April, largely because we have identified South Africa as a champion country alongside Mexico in the implementation of the UN system-wide guidelines on safer cities. And so, yes, I think the work that GIZ in South Africa has done is quite commendable. And I think the conversation around the state of safety in cities report is one thing that the World Peace Forum will be quite glad to see as one of the innovations that cities and their national frameworks can actually utilize to measure and monitor safety and peaceful coexistence.
Thank you, Juma, for that. I see that there's more hands on the chat, and I'm not sure if we can allow Barbara Holtman to come in. She had a question around, just want to get it on the chat. She had a question around how do we ensure resilience? Barbara, would you like to come in? Yes. How do we harness resilience and basic goodness that drives human dynamism while at the same time addressing what is wrong? And I think we've had many conversations now already leading up to what's happening locally in South Africa and internationally abroad. But Barbara, if you'd like to come in. So we've had a question from Muhammad, and Franz has responded to that.
Barbara stepped off.
Oh, Barbara's off. Okay, thanks for that. We have a hand again from Andiswa. Not sure if it's a new question. So there's a question from Muhammad, and which Franz has responded to ensure the question was around how do we ensure community safety in places the state doesn't have an overarching presence. So Franz has responded to that on the chat. So I'd like to encourage any of you who do still have questions to please pose it on the chat. So Juma, I just want to ask you and redirect a question to you. In light of sharing your experiences personally and both professionally, locally and internationally, what is your understanding, contributions, and think that the Urban Fest could do to further enhance the work of the UN Habitat to promote urban safety, and leading up then to the 31st of October, which is World Cities Day. We are together as a country and with the UN Habitat are promoting World Cities Day. You know that the Urban Fest ends on the 31st of October, and we have a whole program planned for the month. And we just want to know, how do we ensure, leading up to World Cities Day, that the UN Habitat pulls together your emphasis on the 40-day Safer City Challenge? And maybe perhaps you can give some insight on what some of the showcases has been. Thank you, Juma, over to you.
Yeah, yes, I think the first, do you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thanks, Juma.
Yes. I think I want to point it on 3 levels, and which perhaps the 40 days, the next 40 days Safer Cities Challenge could possibly be framed around in South Africa and around the Urban Fest. One is the lack of documentary evidence. There's a lot going on. There are a lot of innovations going on, but very little documentation about them. If we can try with the Urban Safety Reference Group to establish what we can consider as a safe city portal that enables international, national, and local comparisons of the innovations that are taking place in cities at the community level, at the municipal level. I think this will facilitate many to understand how the challenge of safety is actually now being transformed into an opportunity for building more livable cities. Documentary evidence. Number 2, I think there is need for us to systematize the experiences by way of adopting some of these 3-4 metros that have been long in the game of institutionalizing and implementing safety strategies. We need to adopt them as laboratories. And laboratories, which means a clear partnership between the municipality and the local universities, yeah, to already take this knowledge that is being generated to a level of learning by way of, for example, the Municipal Institutes of Learning in the 40 days facilitating training sessions for municipal officials. I think this would be a fantastic opportunity for municipal officials to understand what works and what is not working, particularly where other stakeholders are concerned. And finally, I think the flagship report of the State of Safety in Cities report is one that I think can be localized more to the municipalities, to also equally release similar reports during this 40 days and Urban October. If we could take 3 or 4 municipalities and challenge them to do this, it will also very much tie in with the local voluntary review process that the 2030 agenda is calling for.
Thank you, Juma. Thank you for those recommendations. And we will certainly live up to that expectation and plan ahead for the next Urban Fest to ensure that we have a data repository that's good and filled with evidence to showcase some of the remarkable things that South Africa is doing in contribution to urban safety. And I think what's important is to ensure that we collaborate with the Urban Safety Reference Group through all of the experiences to showcase what we're doing. And I think the Safer Cities report by the South African Cities Network with GIZ and the relevant partners showcases a good example on how we can further take the work forward. Juma and Franz, just want to say, are there any closing remarks or comments from your side? And how do some of the participants get in contact with you? Are you comfortable enough to share your contacts on the chat, email address on the chat, and perhaps some closing remarks on your side? Maybe we'll start with Franz first, and then we'll hand over to Juma if there are no further questions on the chat or from participants.
Thank you, Stephanie. I have no problem to have contact to any participant. I think you have my email address. You can distribute it to anybody. There's no problem. One of the, as an old man, as some people in Durban call me grandfather or godfather sometimes of Safer City, I would just say that after about 35 years working in this field, what I've seen in Africa, what I've seen in Latin America, and also today in Asia is big progress, maybe insufficient, but if I remain well in the year 95 in South America or in Africa, there were little activities on safety and security at municipal level. There were some isolated experience, except maybe in it started in Medellin and Bogota because they were in civil war. It was a catastrophic situation, but the rest there was nothing. Today there is a lot. There are many mistakes, there are failure, there are wrong approach sometimes, but it's a big progress. So I'm quite being called quite optimist in the sense that I see always more and more municipal experience. The coronavirus show us that the mayor all around the world, in the rich country and poor country, are asking for more power, more activity in the line of human security. So it's a big project. We have to take advantage of that, of this present situation, and to realize that if you don't make a job on safety and security in that broad aspect of human security in each territory, each city, each neighborhood, we will not advance too much. We need this activity. It's so important that the central government economic good policy. It's so important than the police at the central government level. What we do in the municipality, it's basic to rebuild social fabric and to advance in the sense of social cohesion. So if I look behind, I see, okay, there's a lot of progress, but it's a lot to do. But I'm quite, finally, if you look that in a historical view, you see that there is some progress. And one of the countries which have been a pioneer is South Africa in that sense. So I congratulate particularly Durban in this, and also experience like Khayelitsha, for example, in Cape Town, have been extremely important for the progress of this safety security approach at municipal level. So I hope that will continue and we progress, and we will exchange experience among different regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franz, for those recommendations and those nice, kind words that you've actually said from your side. And I think to also highlight that you're congratulating the work that's been done thus far in eThekwini and in Cape Town. So thank you very much for those contributions, Franz. It was such a pleasure to have you here on the call with us. And Franz has shared his email address with everybody on the chat. Should you need to get in contact with him, he is available. I think it's very important what Franz highlighted as well, that we're living in a different time frame, and COVID-19 has taught us many different things, and above all, I think safety is placed at the first, and keeping healthy at the same time. So thank you once again, Franz. Juma, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie. It's quite commendable that COCTA has brought together this urban festival to celebrate the innovations that we see in various aspects of urban, and in particular safety. I think with the 40-day Safer Cities Challenge, I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to join an expert group meeting on the development of the Urban Safety Monitor that begins on the 26th of October to the 28th of October, hosted by the city of Madrid. This is really the opportunity for all of us to look at the indicators we are using, including in the State of Safety of Cities report, and to bring them to an international bearing. We hope that in that conversation at the expert group meeting, we will be able to come up with a monitor that has a set number of dimensions that municipalities can use to operationalize their safety strategies and to benchmark and report regularly towards the 2030 goals, targets, and indicators. Secondly, I would also emphasize that we have developed a neighborhood guide, and the neighborhood guide will enable us to now approach municipalities with classifications of the neighborhoods. As we have implemented in Guadalajara, we believe that some of the municipalities in South Africa can adopt this, and on a broader scale, have these elements contribute to the peer review process that the UN system-wide guidelines on safer cities and human settlements has set into motion. I think we can have an intra-country peer review amongst 10 or so municipalities or metros in South Africa to look at measurement and monitoring, and to be able to then put in place these monitoring frameworks that allow cities to come up with those detailed reports that are not just reports, but they are there for benchmarking and also for building a local governance framework of accountability between citizens and the cities.
Thank you, Juma, so much for that information. It really has been such a great pleasure to have you and Franz on this platform. Given your expertise and your years of experience and your passion for this in particular, it's been a real honor to share the Urban Fest platform to showcase the various innovations from the UN Habitat. I think what's very interesting is many of the participants will be looking forward to the expert group invitation, which will be virtual at Madrid. So further information you can request from Juma. We have shared his email address on the chat. And I think what's nice to know is we are busy with the peer review process of the UN system-wide safer city guidelines. And if you would like more information on that, even on the neighborhood guidelines now that Juma has alluded to, please feel free to drop me or Juma an email on the above, and we'll be grateful to further collaborate. I think we also have our colleagues from the South African Cities Network, who is also our partners in this event, and any information requiring from the Urban Safety Reference Group, you can contact them as well. Sadna is also on the call this afternoon. So from my side, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. I'd like to thank our tech that has been in the background, our organizers, our speakers for this afternoon session, and all the attendees that have come through to support this event. And we are hoping that we can further have conversations offline with you and further create the synergy and the energy and the relationships going forward. So from my side, thank you, Juma and Franz and everybody else that attended. once again, thank you, and over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juma.
Thank you.
I'm sorry to arrive late, but I couldn't
Yeah.
do it.
Yes, now Mexico. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Okay.